Hi, this is Michelle Kaufman with Google, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Modernism Week in Palm Springs, California, every February. This 11-day architecture and design festival hosts exciting modernist house tours, insightful lectures, designer shopping, architecture documentary premieres, eye-popping house parties, detailed exhibitions, and much more. And for almost 10 years, U.S. Modernist Radio has been your gateway to all the action, reporting from the U.S. Modernist compound. That would be poolside at the hip Hotel Skylark, interviewing guests in the world of architecture and design. I'm Tom Guild. Over the spring and summer, we'll bring you these one-on-one interviews, plus special guests recorded right here in the studio. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle Square Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Palm Springs, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Toronto. Aspen, the land of clean air, brisk skiing, pensive think tanks, and enormous wealth. Nestled in the gorgeous mountains of Colorado, you might not know that Aspen was influenced by modernism and has some special connections to the Bauhaus in Germany. Today, you'll hear from Lissa Ballinger, acting director of the Aspen Institute, about that Bauhaus-Aspen connection. And then we'll talk with photographer Isaac Jeffries on modernist resorts of the Catskills in New York. They're famous for more than just comedians and Mrs. Maisel. Later, you'll hear a very interesting conversation with jazz trumpeter David Weiss of the Cookers. And now, someone who craves an In-N-Out burger, animal style, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. We do love going out to Palm Springs, a town that knows how to live. Sun-soaked days by the pool, desert air crisp and clean. You feel your worries melt away like a snowflake on a hot General Electric cooktop. Woo! In case you are outdoors with your cooktop in snow. Evenings shimmer under a canopy of stars, and the air hums with the murmur of conversation, the clink of ice in highball glasses, and the laugh of a drop-dead gorgeous person across the pool who's obviously flirting with you. There's a quiet elegance that whispers sophistication and has a rhythm all its own. Palm Springs is a place where martinis flow like lazy rivers and friendships are forged over a scotch near the fire pit. And oh yeah, all that great architecture. Modernism Week in Palm Springs is the Super Bowl of all the architecture we love. You want to go with U.S. Modernist in February 2025 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist compound, a.k.a. the swanky Hotel Skylark? Email me at george@usmodernist.org.
Lissa Ballinger is the acting director of the Aspen Institute, a Washington, D.C. headquartered think tank that brings together influential people to address global issues. Think Davos, but without the chocolate. Lissa manages the collections and exhibitions on the Aspen, Colorado campus and in D.C. A graduate of Columbia,
Go Lions!
She presented on Aspen architect Herbert Bayer at this year's Modernism Week. Here's George's chat poolside with Lissa Ballinger.
Lissa, our research team discovered that you're going to live forever. You are certified in Pilates. You teach group fitness. You do this thing called body pump. You are a runner, biker. You're around the trails. You ski. I mean, this is fantastic.
I am a typical Aspen girl, that is for sure. Doing all the things I can to make myself strong to be able to participate in the outdoors.
And Aspen is pretty high up, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We're at almost 8,000 feet.
Doesn't being high up and doing all these things really make you Wonder Woman?
Even stronger, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I come down to sea level and I just feel like I'm a hero. It's wonderful.
The Olympic people do that, right? Don't they train up
They used
somewhere?
to. I mean, I think that was a theory for a while, but now they're not necessarily doing that as much anymore.
Okay.
Because you're compromised up there. At
Okay.
a higher elevation, you're compromised.
Yeah. I mean, I am one of those people that is sensitive to elevations. Like when I go into Denver, which is 3,000 feet below you, I'm huffing and puffing
Yep.
all around town.
Yeah.
What do you say to visitors who come and have that? Is there a quick fix for that?
Not drinking alcohol.
Okay.
That is number one, drinking tons of water. But one of my favorite quotes, actually, from Goethe when he visited Aspen was he said, Aspen is a little too close to heaven for him, which I just loved that he said that. A lot of people struggle with the altitude. And, it's an opportunity for visitors to slow down, drink water, take some time,
Take some
etc.
time.
Yeah.
Okay.
But a lot of people, unfortunately, experience altitude sickness. And so sadly, my mother, who has lived there for 27 years, we just had to move her down, which happens to many people, including Herbert Bayer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about him in a minute. Tell me about the Aspen Institute. I've heard of it for years. I didn't know if it was like a science place with beakers or a public policy place or a film festival. I mean, what is the Institute?
So the Aspen Institute was founded in 1949 in Aspen, Colorado, but now it's based out of Washington, D.C. It is home to about 60 different policy programs. And its mission, it's a global nonprofit committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society.
Okay.
And so it's a nonpartisan organization. And the arm for which I work is the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies, which is under the umbrella of the Aspen Institute, but really an anomaly within the Aspen Institute.
Yeah, it seems like that's a little different from the global policy kinds of things it normally does.
It is different, but it's very aligned with its beginnings.
Tell me about Herbert Bayer. Why is he part of the Aspen Institute?
Herbert Bayer was involved with the very beginnings of the Aspen Institute, along with Elizabeth and Walter Pepke in 1949. Herbert Bayer moved to Aspen in 1946 at the request of Walter Pepke. And the Pepkes had a really unique vision for Aspen, which was beyond a typical commerce or industry being brought into it was at that point a dilapidated, sort of abandoned mining town. And Pepke had this incredible vision, this utopian ideal that Aspen could be a cultural utopia where business leaders and political thinkers and philosophers could come and congregate in Aspen, in that particular place, surrounded by the Rocky Mountains, inspired by the natural environment, and maybe divorced from their everyday lives, they could consider the good society, the great issues of a day in a new and inspired way. And he teamed with Herbert Bayer to create the entire Aspen Institute campus. And the Aspen Institute was actually founded in 1950. We're about to celebrate our 75th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Over a period of 20 years, from 1953 to 1973, Bayer built and designed the entire 40-acre Aspen Institute campus, from the buildings to the ditch lines to the earthworks, this incredible, inspiring space that
How many buildings on campus about?
is built. Well, it's had grown and then shrunk because originally the Aspen Institute encompassed also the music festival, Aspen Music Festival and School, which was a tremendous nonprofit also in Aspen, went in its own way in 1955, and then the physics department was part of it. We now have about 8 buildings on campus, but the Bayer Center is a new building on campus, and that was a real success to get a new building on campus because the campus was so clearly defined and designated by Herbert Bayer.
So who designed the new building?
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about him. His name is Jeffrey Burkus, and his father, Barry Burkus, actually did a bunch of architecture in Palm Springs.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I know Barry Burkus.
Yes, exactly. So it's his son. So the wonderful thing is that Jeff Burkus actually grew up with Bayer paintings. He's very familiar with Herbert Bayer. Jeff and his company, they actually built 2 buildings on campus, the only 2 non-Bayer buildings on campus. One is called the Doer-Hosier Center, which is a conference service center, and the other one is our extraordinary 7,000 square foot art center called the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies. The original tent that was built on the site of what is now the Aspen Institute was built by Eero Saarinen in 1949. And Pepke was a huge supporter of architecture. And he envisioned also, along with this cultural utopia, he envisioned an architectural village where he would invite all of the most interesting architects of the time. And he had this whole proposal of IMP and all these different people coming to build buildings. We actually have a Buckminster Fuller dome on our campus, which was one of those original ideas.
Yes, sure.
However, Pepke unfortunately passed away in 1960, and that was never realized.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, I know. But we have incredible buildings all over our campus, over the entire city of Aspen, because of the tremendous wealth, obviously, that's in Aspen as well.
Does Aspen work kind of like Davos? Is there like a week every year where all the VIPs come in and talk with each other, or is it spread out over the year? How does it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Aspen is such a different place, just like Palm Springs, like so many different places. I feel like it has evolved so much over the years. I would say the largest congregation of sort of intellectuals comes for Ideas Festival, but I'm biased because that is a program that the Aspen Institute puts on. But that really is one of the highlight events of the summer, and it's a 10-day festival where people come from around the world to come and do exactly what the Aspen Institute does best, which is bring people together to have conversations and, just like Pepke's original vision, try to solve the great problems of the day.
Does Aspen take credit for solving any great problems in its history? Has it generated something that
is
can
tangible?
Kind of be tracked back to Aspen?
I don't know the answer to that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope the problems of the world have been changed from Aspen, but I don't know a single specific one.
Okay. Now, how did Beyer influence other residents of town? Did they look at the campus and say, I want a house like that, and start commissioning him for homes?
He did do several homes. He was the architect, but he never had any specific architectural training. So all of the architecture he did in Aspen was in collaboration with his brother-in-law, Fritz Benedict.
Okay.
While architecture was really interesting to him, and he actually was commissioned to do many projects, including the first one he did when he moved to Aspen, which was the sun deck on top of Aspen Mountain at 11,200 feet, which was in the shape of a hexagon. But that wasn't residential. But
is that something you take a cable car up to?
You take the gondola up.
The gondola up.
It was designed because Pepke had commissioned at that time, the longest chairlift in the world, which was also the slowest and coldest. It took 40 minutes to get to the top of the mountain. So he realized that he had to have someone build a building, a structure at the top as a warming hut. And that's the site of where the current sun deck on top of Aspen Mountain is still today. It's obviously been torn down and rebuilt. But to your original question, really, I'm going to give credit to Gropius here, because he came to Aspen in 1945 with Pepke as well. And Gropius said the thing that really, I think, has led our architecture in Aspen, which was preserve the best of the old, preserve the extraordinary Victorian architecture that existed from the silver mining days. But if you're going to build modern. And that is very different than other ski towns around us, where it's imitative, reductive, Swiss village type of architecture, or they could have just copied the old Victorian architecture. But I love what Gropius said, and I would say that really helped influence a lot of the growth of Aspen today.
Now, at 8,000 feet, do you fly in? Is there an airport up that high? I mean, how do you get there?
There is an airport. I struggled. I almost didn't make it here to Modernism Week because of our, it's a challenging airport. It's a wonderful, when it works well, it's a wonderful little regional airport, but we're in the mountains and there's, fast changing storms. So it's always an adventure. Always an adventure getting in and Aspen. Yeah. And in the summer, there's two ways out of town. You can go over Independence Pass, or you can go what's called Down Valley. But in the winter, there's only one route. Independence Pass is closed because of the snow. And so we can also fly out of Denver, but that's about a 3.5-hour drive.
Oh, that's a big drive.
Yeah, that's a big drive. So if you can, flying out of Aspen is a dream, but unfortunately doesn't always go well.
Is it set up for big jetliners?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's got to be like the smaller commuter type planes?
Yep.
Okay, I gotcha. So how did Aspen attract such wealth? How did it become known for this?
I think ultimately, like all the progress, if you want to call it that, of a lot of the resort towns around Colorado, it happened quickly and slowly. And of course, I would say it's all because of Pepke's original dream, that he was able to establish this incredible place that, the Aspen idea that he established, the nurturing of the mind, body, spirit, is really alive. And so it attracts many people. And it seems like COVID really changed things as well. It sort of accelerated everything in resort towns. But it has been going on, since the 70s and 80s. It's been bringing a lot of people. And a lot of that was Pepke originally inviting a lot of people to come to Aspen, to invest in Aspen, to move to Aspen, et cetera. And then it just sort of tumbled onto each other.
Since you are tracking Herbert Bayer architecture, are there other architects today that are building in Aspen that you know of?
Yes. I don't know currently, but, there's an incredible Renzo piano home that was recently constructed. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of architects that have built homes in Aspen. Most of them are not open to the public, obviously. Right. But we have the Aspen Art Museum, which is an incredible resource in Aspen, was built by Shagoo Raban. So we have some prominent architects. And I really appreciate the fact that all of the architects that are coming into Aspen, it seems like, are trying to honor the history of Aspen in some way, in whatever their architecture plans are.
Okay. Does your group work with people in high school or college, kind of helping them understand the history of the town and how they could be influential in the future?
That's a great question. Yeah, we actually have 2 gifts to help perpetuate our educational programs, and it's a huge part of what we're doing at the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies. We have our inaugural Penner Manager of Educational Programs, Andrew Travers, who's working with the schools up and down the valley, either bringing them into our exhibitions, because we are an art exhibition space, or going and presenting about Herbert Bayer, about Bauhaus, about modernism, about this amazing connection between Aspen and these ideals. And then also we just received a gift from the Illumination Fund to help us to expand even further. So it's a huge part of what we're doing is educational programming for both children and also for adults.
Now, is this Illumination that starts with an I?
Yes.
Okay, because I know the Illumination that starts with an A. It's a great documentary about Airstreams, but I digress. I didn't know if the Airstream people were contributing to this, which would have been fantastic.
That would have been fantastic.
Yeah. What other cities are similar to Aspen?
I would say, as far as I know, really none. I mean, it's why I live in Aspen. It's such a unique place. Sun Valley has similar qualities. It's an amazing resort town. It also has...
That's Idaho, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It has tremendous cultural opportunities as well. But once you've been to Aspen, I really... it's a struggle to live there in a lot of ways for locals like me. But it's the reason that I live there, the reason why a lot of people live there, is this incredible balance between the most unbelievable cultural opportunities in the world and also the incredible mountains around that offer so much.
Where can people find more information about the Aspen Institute and particularly your piece of it online?
We have a website, thebayercenter.org, and of course, we always welcome visitors. I am so proud of the visitor experience that anyone has who visits us and the amount of information you'll learn about Aspen and about the beginnings of the Aspen Institute and Herbert Bayer specifically. We're open Tuesday through Saturday, 12 to 5 p.m., and we're free, and we offer free tours at least 2 times a week as well.
Okay. So
it's an amazing resource, but online we do have a website, thebayercenter.org.
It's thebayercenter.org, TheBayercenter.org.
Yep, exactly.
Thanks so much for talking with me, Lissa.
Thank you, George. Have a great day.
That was George talking with Lissa Ballinger. Beautiful Rhinebeck, New York has been the place where you can go find yourself at the Omega Institute. And it's also home to photographer Isaac Jeffries. He's been working on the Borscht Belt Historical Marker Project, an interactive mapping of the more than 500 resorts in and around Sullivan and Ulster counties that primarily served Jewish clientele. These resorts and their clubs and entertainment had an outsized influence on American culture. Think Jackie Mason, George Burns, Mel Brooks, Rodney Dangerfield, Don Rickles, Buddy Hackett, Lenny Bruce, Phyllis Diller, Joan Rivers, and even Golden Girl Estelle Getty. Isaac is a master of highly staged, meticulously lit night photography. He's used that skill to preserve what's left of these resorts into a new book. And George chats poolside with him, Isaac Jeffries.
Isaac, I think for a lot of people who are young and even some older folks, the most frequent exposure they've had to the Catskills lately has been Mrs. Maisel.
Yes. Indeed
They
it
did
has.
1 or 2 episodes where they really glammed up the whole experience of being at one of these resorts
Oh, yes.
in the late 50s, early 60s.
I was in Mrs. Maisel, actually.
You were?
For, I think, not the Catskills season, but the 2 seasons after that, because I was so obsessed with the idea of them recreating that, and I wanted to feel as authentic as you can get, which is people in period costumes, what that felt like in a way. But I also think that Mrs. Maisel is like the best introduction that anybody could ever have to the Catskills, because everybody who existed during that time loved it. And I mean, there aren't really many ways of kind of getting that story out there without bringing it to like a new sort of vernacular, new sort of narrative. And I guess Dirty Dancing would be the only other one that I could think of that would be intensely popular. Mm-hmm. But another way that I think people could get exposed to the Catskills, or the way that I at least try to show people, besides like through the architecture, or through the people that got their starts there. Because you may not know like the Grossinger Hotel, but people know the names of like Judy Garland, Barbra Streisand, you know, Sammy Davis Jr., all of that other stuff. Thank you.
The drinks have arrived.
The drinks have
and
arrived.
it's 10 a.m. in the morning. Here, cheers.
Cheers.
Yes, it's Palm
you.
Springs.
But yeah, I think the Catskills kind of lives on through the names of the people that performed there. I mean, American comedy was shaped by the existence of that. It's hard to kind of get the story out there because it's not that it was erased from history, but between like 1970 and 2000, nobody wanted to go there and nobody documented it. So
it just fell apart.
And the only ones that people really knew about that were, I guess, under the age of 30 were the abandoned ones, which is still cool, but not the same sort of narrative that was going on, 50 years prior.
Now, in Mrs. Maisel, it's more of a Jewish family camp, right?
Yeah, it's
which is one system, and then there were more resorts with entertainers and bands and comedians and things like that.
Yeah, so the Catskills experience was basically, it's basically an adult summer camp. Definitely had a strong Jewish influence, and then kind of transitioned into more of like a Miami, like a Gentile sort of atmosphere is kind of how they evolved into in the late 60s when they really wanted to get people in and cultures were changing and everything. But I'd say your traditional like Borscht Belt Catskills resort would have that sort of summer camp vibe to it in some sort of way or another, because they all had the same activities at each resort. But yeah, you definitely have ones like the Concord, which is the Fontainebleau of the North, is what they called it, and Morris Lapidus really put his all into it. And actually, a lot of Morris Lapidus' earlier work from like 1950 to 1959 was done in Sullivan County in the Catskills, so it wasn't really documented, but everything that he's famous for now, he got his sort of start there. But then you also have those resorts that really are like bungalows and, just kind of have like a sort of shoddy vibe to them, but it's like campy in like a fun way,
So give me a sense of the scale of all this. So between the family camps and the more resort-oriented facilities, how many places were there in the Catskills?
Within Sullivan County is the primary county that the Borscht Belt existed in, which is 90 minutes north of Manhattan. And then Ulster County, there was like a little offset of resorts. In total, recorded, there were 538 hotels.
500?
All mid-century, yes. 538 hotels, all within like a 50-mile radius of each other. And then 50,000 bungalows. Not bungalow colonies, but bungalows in total. So that makes for a good amount of people and a good amount of design and resorts. And it's another reason why that entire area it's not that it's kind of in a state of limbo because it's starting to change, but it was so hard for them to move to a different sort of thing because everywhere you go is a resort, And
at its peak, what was it like to head out there for a weekend or a week?
I can only imagine, but after pretty extensive research, I'd say that The journey could be sometimes strenuous or difficult. It depends on what year we're going at. If we're going in the 40s, you could be taking a train for up to 7 hours that stops and has to get its engine fixed and stops up a mountain. 1950-something, the quick way was built, and in the 1960s, the boom was there of American travel. So you would essentially go up with your family for 3 days to, in that time, actually, people would vacation out there for about 3 weeks. And it depends on kind of who would go, but say it was your traditional family unit, husband, wife, 2 kids. They would go up for the week. Normally the husband would go down to the city to work in the week from Monday to Friday. So the hotels were really woman-owned and operated. They always called the whole Catskills experience like a matriarchal sort of moment going on.
Yes.
Which I think is really, really rare for the time, and I find that to be really interesting. But there was a sort of swinger culture that was going on there that was sort of untold. I mean, it's like summer camp. It's kind of like adults acting like teenagers. If you went to somewhere like the Concord, you would probably be able to have dinner theater 3 to 4 times a night in multiple different rooms if you really wanted to go. They had a thing called the American Plan, which was 4 meals a day, all you can eat.
Wow.
That was included in the stay.
Ships.
Like cruise ships. It was essentially a cruise ship, but within a resort context, all for a fixed price.
Okay.
And they had the dress shops, they had indoor pools, outdoor pools, always Olympic size, shuffleboard, archery, basically anything that...
Bowling was featured in Mrs. Maisel?
Bowling was actually only in about 3 of the resorts in the Borscht Belt. It actually was more popular, I'd say, in the 1930s and the 1940s out there. But as Helen Kutcher, who was the sort of final matriarchal resort leader in 2014 before Kutcher's closed, said basically guests would just want the hotels to have things even if they wouldn't use them. They would say, do you have an indoor pool? Do you have archery? They'd say, I'm not going to use it. I just like to know that you have it. And that's basically how they attracted their clientele. And something I was thinking about actually preparing for my talk in a few days is that the Catskills probably had the most mid-century indoor pools out of anywhere in the entire country. Mm. I mean, we're talking 100 to 200 indoor pools that were each designed by the top designers of, 1955 to 1975. So it's a special place.
Who were some of the architects in addition to Morris Lapidus that did buildings there?
Morris Lapidus, obviously, that was his sort of breeding ground for his ideas. One of his associates and students, I think his name is H.D. Phillips, that was his name. He did a lot of the kitschier hotels. It was kind of an offshoot, think Morris Lapidus, but without his sort of ceiling decals and everything. Instead, they would just put in these intense patterns, crazy floors. So there was those two, and then I think this man's name is Snide Silverman. I may be butchering that name a little bit, but there was a third local architect, and he did a lot of the indoor pools at a lot of the modern resorts kind of in their later years. And then in the 1970s, I always called this the ugly brutalism era. They had this guy named Dennis Juro, and his style was very postmodern, keeping the costs efficient, but kind of referencing mid-century. It didn't really make for the prettiest of buildings, but you definitely have a whole range there. And prior to the Morris Lapidus Renaissance that happened there, the hotels were either super-duper stucco, Spanish vibes, or Tudor styled. And the sort of Spanish experience was initially inspired by, I think, the fact that they really wanted to reference Europe and Eastern Europe. So the two styles were coined Sullivan County Mission and Sullivan County Tudor.
Okay.
And those aren't really included in modern architecture books at all, but the hotels of that era were so distinct and set a precedent for the later years, because what they would do is take these 4-story stucco buildings that were very, very outdated, stuck in 1925, and then tack on a mid-century lobby, and then perhaps an indoor pool wing that looks nothing like the lobby or the building. So the buildings sometimes ended up being a mishmash of 4 different architectural styles, and they would cut a lot of corners. Some rooms would be advertised as super-duper modern, then you'd go and it would be from 50 years prior.
Right.
I think it's a sampler of architecture and design. That's what I really love about the era and the area. It's just anywhere that you go, you see the influences from Miami, Hawaii, Los Angeles, Palm Springs. And all of the resort owners also had winter resorts in Miami. So like the Fontainebleau was owned by the owners of the Laurels and the Catskills, or Eden Rock, which is owned by the owners of the Aladdin and the Catskills. So
Okay.
there's fun stuff. And then the Browns owned this resort in Palm Springs called Casisas del Monte. I think I may be butchering that name as well. But it's now, I think, some sort of apartment complex. But the connection it's there, which
Between
I think
all
is
of those
interesting.
places.
Yeah.
The Catskills are famous for comedy, as a
Comedy.
nexus of comedy. Who are some of the comedians that came out of there?
I mean, you can honestly name any, and I'm pretty sure they've been there. The ones that are the most notable to me, though, that kind of got their starts and really, found their footing are Jerry Lewis, Buddy Hackett, definitely, Jerry Seinfeld. He was backstage at Kutcher's and told Milton Kusher that he has a pilot in a few days that he's shooting, and he doesn't know if it's going to go well, and he never ended up going back to the resort after that, so classically. And then Toady Fields, rest in peace. Joan
Yes.
Rivers, rest in peace.
Jackie Mason,
Jackie
right?
Mason.
Very famous.
Trying to think of who else. I mean, Red Buttons.
Is it true he started his I Never Got a Dinner bit at the Catskills? I've always heard that story.
I can only imagine, yes, because everything got its start in the Catskills. Who's the other one? Oh my goodness. The director, Mel Brooks.
Yes.
He got his start in the Catskills as well, which not a whole lot of people know about, but somebody found his liner notes from 1939 at this hotel called the Butler Lodge in Hurleyville, and it's just interesting to think about how all of this existed, and now, I mean, nothing is really going on at those resorts, but half these places are just a plot of land, and you would never really know how poignant this stuff was. And to me, I mean, I love Barbra Streisand. She's like one of my favorite 60s stars. Not only did she spend her formative years in the Catskills, I think her father actually passed away at one of the camps up there, but she got her start performing at a few of the resorts when she was 15, 16, 17. Eventually was told that she'll never perform at the Concord or in the Catskills and the big resorts, and then comes back 2 years later and performs in the Concord at the biggest theater in the country. Fun fact, also, the Concord
Really?
Hotel. Yes, so Morris Lapidus designed the Imperial Room, which was the largest nightclub in the country from 1958 to, I don't know, whenever the next larger one was built, but it held 3,000 people.
That's a big club.
It was huge. They fit them all in like sardines. It was standing room only, a very, very glorious ceiling, as you can imagine. But yeah, the Catskills it's a lot of firsts. They also invented fake snow there, which is kind of random, but
That's
pretty
good.
interesting.
Good fact.
Yeah.
So what happened? Why the decline? Why aren't we running up there today to these beautiful buildings?
I'm asking the same question because if these resorts hung on for a few more years, I think that there would have been interest, especially in the way that they were designed in the 60s. I mean, it's total mid-century excitement. And the concept, I think, is something that would really, really make people happy, just like that sort of summer camp moment. People say that they call it the 3 A's: air conditioning, air travel, and assimilation. And I think air travel has a big part of it. Air conditioning is kind of 50-50 because I wouldn't say that that's the number one cause. But I think, honestly, it was a change in the culture. That's the way that I have come
kind
to
of
kind of
change?
find out. I mean, in the 1930s and 1940s, the majority of the resorts were basically Jewish only because they were all founded under the sort of pretense of these signs when you would go to a resort that was a Christian resort and it would say no dogs, no Jews. So they
Right.
created their own sort of renaissance. But then once the 1960s rolled around and, intermarriage was becoming more popular, the civil rights movement was becoming a thing, and the resorts were trying to kind of keep up with that. That shifted because the resort owners didn't really know how to attract a different clientele that wasn't coming up consistently for 30 years. And then beyond this, I just think economically and societally, nobody was doing a night in the theater 3 nights a week in their furs in 1975.
Right.
And there was no
It was all
need
over.
and the resorts would have, 4 ballrooms and be exorbitant amounts of money to run. And it eventually just kind of, catapulted in the wrong direction. And there was almost, I call it a mass exodus of Sullivan County because once one resort called the Young's Gap Hotel closed in 1965, it was like a domino effect until the 90s when only the Concord and Kutcher's and the Pines and the Nevele were open. And then by 2014, Kutcher's closed and none of the original resorts remain anymore, which is very, very sad to me because it's just, 538 hotels. You would think that
So
one
they're
would
all
survive.
gone. All those resorts are gone.
They're gone. Some of them exist in the physical state because I take
Right.
photos of them.
We'll talk
now,
about that in a minute.
But yeah, they're gone.
And some of the family camps, though, are still running, right?
A few. So some of the properties that weren't abandoned were sold to religious organizations or rehab facilities. A lot of Jewish summer camps for the Orthodox and Hasidic population of like Brooklyn come up, and they've kind of reclaimed the resorts as their own sort of, they use it as a summer camp, so they're not really using the buildings, in the way that they were used in the 50s, but it will be interesting because you'll walk into a, indoor pool that was designed by Morris Lapidus and see it converted into a synagogue or something like that, which is a weird transition because it's kind of the exact opposite, but yeah, things have been repurposed, but nothing really exists in its original state. And a few bungalow colonies here and there still have the original family names attached, but a lot of the Catskills moved to Miami in the 1970s. A lot of the hotel owners and everything, it was either Miami or Los Angeles or, in this case, Palm Springs as well.
Palm Springs as well. You have visited what's left of a number of these places.
Yes.
As I'm soon hundreds of people have done before you, taking photos.
Yes.
What's the term for that? There's some sort of term for visiting abandoned buildings.
They call it urban exploration.
Yes, that's it.
But I do not consider what I do urban exploration.
Right.
Though it technically is, I guess.
Technically it is.
Yes.
You got to give it that. But what is so unique about the photos that you take is that you reanimate these
Yes.
places. You will go into what might be a dusty, dark bar and figure out how to light it up and then take a photo of it. So it's almost like it has just blinked back on for a moment
Yes.
for your photos. And they're just incredibly unique.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there a book in the works?
There is a book in the works. We need to find the publisher for the book. But the conversations are being had, which is good.
Yeah.
And the photos are 95% done. I'll never be done photographing the area, but I'm definitely ready to kind of have it all culminate into one because I've been doing this sort of style of photos for the past 3 or 4 years pretty consistently. The feeling behind taking these was that I remember when I walked into the indoor pool at Grossinger's Hotel in 2018, and as an 18-year-old I was interested in abandoned buildings, but I didn't feel that sort of creep factor. I was in awe, honestly. You saw these Sputniks that were the size of two of us. They were huge. They were like 10 feet long, 15 of them lining the ceiling, this beautiful sort of wood beam, like...
Sputniks are light fixtures.
Yes,
in case you want to know.
Yes.
Not space capsules.
But honestly, it felt like they were. It felt like they could fly up at any time. And these cascading windows and just the feeling that I got when I was in there was, in a way, sadness, but also a desire to really see and feel physically as much as I could left of this era before it, got demolished. And that's kind of what I set out to do.
Well, tell me, is this a guerrilla operation, or do you have to try to figure out, who still owns these places?
Yeah.
And also, another follow-up question, how do you light them up? I assume the power's off.
The power is off.
Yeah.
So... basically, the photos at this point, I've become very meticulous with this process because I reference the brochures from the 50s and the 60s. And, for years I was walking into these places and wondering, I kept saying to myself, why does it look like this? I have the lobby postcard in my hand. The lighting is not the same. Something is wrong. And then I realized I'm just seeing all this stuff with natural light, and all of these photos are made with lights on and stuff. So because of that, I wanted to be really particular about recreating as much as I could from the past and kind of bringing that back. And in doing so, that sometimes takes 3 to 6 hours. So majority of the places I photograph, I try to get permission. I'd say 75% of them I do get permission, which will be good for publishing purposes, thankfully. Yes. Some of them I sneak into, but I wouldn't really say sneak into because they've just really been forgotten about at this point by the police, by the owners. We don't know who owns half of them. I like to go in kind of at dusk. I'm not really that confident in going at like 1 a.m. when it's already dark. I like going when the sun goes down
Right.
and setting up. But
And you've got a lot of batteries.
yes,
I guess.
I use kind of a variety of studio strobe lighting and then little kind of handheld lighting that you can literally get at Home Depot. It's funny how, you would think that the lighting would be so crazy, but it's literally from Home Depot. And I set it up in a pretty particular way, sometimes in a few layers because I'll layer the photos together and set off a little bit of smoke for ambience. And, really try to think of what references the past in the best way, whether it be cove lighting or hiding lighting behind some sort of curtain situation. I just want it to look and feel magical and, in a way, give it a last hurrah. But also, I've always kind of seen this body of work as a response to the era itself, because it was a renaissance of art and design and history and excitement, and so many people put their 110% into this. I can't not make work that doesn't reflect that.
Of the 500 or so buildings, how many have you been in approximately?
Well, I'd say a lot were demolished, so I'd say there's probably like 250, give or
Still
take.
sort of standing.
Yeah, like left, whether it be bungalow colony or a house or a boarding house or a hotel. I'd say that I've photographed, I've probably been to like 200 of them, but I'd say that I've photographed probably like 160 or 170 of them over the years.
That's impressive. How long have you been doing this?
Since, I've been going to the Catskills since I was like 16, 17, so I'd say 5 or 6 years at this point.
Okay.
Which is why now at this point I'm ready for the project to take a turn into kind of the publishing sphere and, really just share it with the world because it is magical.
I have been in some houses and buildings where they'd been abandoned for up to 40 years and walked into a couple of rooms. It looked like they were abandoned the day before, like everything is on the desk.
Yes.
Do you run across that where it's just like
I do.
fresh, looks like it was been there a few days?
So because I've gone repeatedly back to these places and studied the floor plans and all of this other stuff, I used to be fascinated by the idea of, the linens being left over, but what would be more fascinating to me is when I would go back, say, 2 or 3 times later and go into an attic or go into a backstage area. Like when I was backstage at the Jerry Lewis Theater Club at the Browns Hotel, which was built for Jerry Lewis. He was their mascot or whatever. I went backstage after taking a photo, and I found 10 of the original bandstands from 1950 that were hand-painted and said Browns Hotel on them. It was gorgeous. It was like finding lost city of gold within the Catskills. And that's the thing that really surprises me. I'll find, brochures, postcards, cocktail napkins from the 50s and 60s just like wedged away because these places got renovated over and over and over again. So sometimes behind a wall, there will be an old sign or an old mural or something. It just feels like not only history coming alive, but it's an honor to be able to kind of recover lost art in a way, lost mid-century art, because this era, it was documented a little, like I said, but I think it really deserves its flowers because its influence on the art and design world isn't really known about as much. And I mean, the things that I found are gorgeous. It's like the amount of artistry and care and passion that was put into creating just like a mural over a cocktail bar is astounding to me still.
Well, coming out in 2024, Jerry Seinfeld has a movie about Pop-Tarts. So I would think that a documentary about your work, you could try to get him to narrate for you. That would be pretty special.
I would hope so. I am working on a historical marker project right now. So basically, I mean, for me, historical markers, give or take, aren't the most interesting to me because I do enjoy the physical location, but because everything out there is getting demolished and destroyed, I'm working with a team and we're creating these markers that have photos of the resorts on them, and we're creating an audio tour as well that's going to narrate you as you go through the Catskills and go on this audio tour. And Jerry is on the list for that audio tour.
Great.
If we can get him, but we'd hope that we can, because people that vacationed and lived in the Catskills, it's something that's kind of ingrained in you. And I didn't, experience the era at all in its heyday, and I will take this with me throughout. It's a very, very special sort of connection. I mean, maybe like going to the Copacabana in like the 50s was great, but that sort of personal connection with the resort owners and that sort of returning family aspect, that Mrs. Maisel sort of feeling, really only happened in the Catskills.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it was special.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. This is great work that you're doing. And,
no problem.
And please look up Isaac online so you can see some of these photographs.
Thank you for
Isaac,
having
thank
me.
you for joining.
Thank you. I am happy to be here.
That was George with Isaac Jeffries. Jazz trumpeter David Weiss was born in New York City and studied music at West Texas State University
Go Buffaloes!
before returning to New York to embark on a career in jazz that has spanned over 4 decades. David is part of several groups, but his main crew is the Cookers, showcasing some of the most important but unsung jazz artists playing today. And they are awesome. Here's George's conversation with Chief Cooker David Weiss.
David, one of the things I was really struck in your bio is this sentence. In a jazz climate that rewards neoconservative tributes and far-flung exercises in deconstruction, David Weiss has distinguished himself. What are neoconservative tributes and deconstruction for those of us that are not quite that deep into it?
Well, I didn't write it, so we just like the sound of it. It rolls. See how it rolls off your tongue? It just sounds great.
Okay. That's fine.
And also, we've been using that one for a while.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it might mean exactly, but I mean, I know the sentiment.
Yeah.
It seems like there's 2 general schools of jazz these days.
Okay.
One is like the philosophy of jazz at Lincoln Center.
Yeah.
And it's a valid one to me. I mean, jazz has a very rich history that deserves that same kind of reverence to the past as classical music. Like, Duke Ellington is an important composer, just like Bach or Beethoven, and that there's been this repertoire established that needs to be performed. So the audiences can appreciate the rich history of this music. And that's great. That's a great part of this. But what seems to have happened maybe is that it's put jazz in a box. Here's our history. Boom. Here it is. Here's Ellington. Here's Basie. It also kind of says, but now it's dead, But what's happening today? I mean, there is a reverence to the history of this music. And then there's a lot of tributes, these days there's a lot of 100th birthday things. It's Max Roach's 100th birthday. Max Roach was a brilliant artist, brilliant band leader. But sometimes current musicians get the feeling that maybe they're drowning in that history.
Yeah.
And the people interested in that kind of music go to that history. When people today, I guess, the journalists or whatever, when they want to talk about new music, and this is the other side of the coin, they go to the new, the now, the avant-garde, the daring, the da-da-da. And, there's some great music there too. But the emphasis seems to be on okay, the only thing we're paying attention to is who's coming up with the newest whatever thing. And if people are going to play that kind of music, they're already buried in the past and we're not interested in it.
So your group has really filled in some of this niche of being new and honoring the past, but not being steeped in it.
Exactly. And that's, in my opinion, where a lot of the best music always was. It has a sense of the rich history of it because they were part of it, but never gave up the part about trying to move the music forward, trying to be creative, playing it with the same passion and intensity of the stuff that John Coltrane or Miles Davis or those people did. And in my opinion, historically, that's where the best music always lay. You didn't just say, okay, there's this, let's just faithfully recreate this, maybe play, well-versed, whatever. And that's, I guess, the quandary. It's a better version of that statement that I always say, if it's straight ahead, it's stuck in the past. If it's pushing the envelope, maybe you're not reaching some people, because the desire to come up with something new or for people to write about hey, this is the newest, greatest that, maybe disregards this a little bit. But the best of the music I know retains both.
Okay. With your group, the Cookers, the best example I could seem to find in popular culture was Sylvester Stallone and the Expendables. Sylvester pulls together this great group of mercenaries and goes out and fights battles. And you've pulled together this fabulous group of musicians
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, I'd love to use those analogies. No, seriously, you're very astute here, because yes, I've seen some of those movies. Like, let's pull together all these, superstars from the '70s, but the problem is the movies aren't that good.
Yeah.
So I'd love to use that analogy, but then somebody is like, "Oh, but that movie sucked." Yeah, are you trying to say that it was a perfect analogy? It's a few years ago, like a wave of them came out. It wasn't just the one,
Right. There were four of them, I think, so far.
but I mean, I don't want to get in trouble with Sylvester Stallone or something, but none of those movies were really any good.
I don't think he's
So,
listening.
well, you never know. He might have an interest in architecture.
Your group, the Cookers, is, of course, very good and has been able to leverage the talents of your group, and you tour all over the place. I mean, I looked at your tour schedule. It's really amazing.
And we've been going for 16 to 17 years, and most band leaders that last that long, but they go through different personnel and stuff like that. So on that level, it's been, to me at least, it's been quite an accomplishment. There was one year a record came out. I think it was like a third or fourth record, and we were doing a tour off that record. I remember going to the Playboy Jazz Festival up and down the West Coast, all the festivals, and doing this great tour and doing a lot of interviews. And at the time, the NBA playoffs were happening. And there were some really good younger teams, but the San Antonio Spurs with Tim Duncan, they were an older, more team-orientated team, and they were beating all these hotshot teams. And I was like, we're the San Antonio Spurs.
There
That's
you
what we
go.
are.
There you
Because
go.
they were winning. And like for half the tour, they were applying for the playoffs. And then some young team beat them, and I couldn't use the analogy anymore. But the team concept, the team that learned to play together, that had the best coach, had the experience of knowing how to be the individual great player you are, but also part of a team and understand a role within the team. Like, George Cable's, our pianist, is always like, my job is to help make the band sound the best it can. Obviously, he's an amazing soloist and he brings a lot to the table, but he also knows, like, no, my role is to do this.
Well, speaking of George Cable's, tell me about this first song we're going to play called Farewell Mulgrew that he wrote.
Well, it's a beautiful tune. He wrote it to a great pianist who is younger than him. It's a generation after him, named Mulgrew Miller. There were two great pianists of that generation, Mulgrew Miller and Kenny Kirkland, and unfortunately, they're both not with us anymore. So Mulgrew died maybe about 10 years ago now, and George wrote this for him.
Here are the Cookers with Farewell Mulgrew. That was fantastic, David. Let's talk about the members of the band. Who is in the Cookers?
Well, it's George Cables on piano,
Uh-huh.
Cecil McBee on bass, and Billy Hart on drums. And that's our rhythm section. Donald Harrison on alto saxophone, and me on trumpet. My mentor, Eddie Henderson, on trumpet, and Billy Harper on tenor saxophone.
Okay. Have you ever thought about bringing in a woman like the Wrecking Crew did years ago to hang out with you?
The Wrecking Crew, that was Carol Kay, right? The bass player?
Yeah.
Well, they brought her in because she was the best bass player.
And she's still around. Yeah.
Yeah, I see her. She does Facebook posts. Very, very concise. Very, like this is how you do it. It doesn't sound much different than what I'm saying. You got to do this. You got to do this. This is what we did. We played the parts. We did whatever to make whatever music work. Our personalities came out, but only this much, or something like that. But it's that same older school philosophy that I'm a believer of, I guess. It makes sense, and look what they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't replaced anybody in the Cookers. The Cookers have been the Cookers since.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, one personnel change. Donald Harrison came in 2013 now. So Donald Harrison's been with us for 10 years.
So he's the young man on the bus.
I'm the young man on the bus.
Tell me about this next song, Cat's Out the Bag.
We recorded this album during COVID. When COVID hit, we had a substantial European tour planned for basically the week things shut down. And so the whole tour was canceled. We all kept in touch with everybody as we were all sitting at home, twiddling our thumbs a little bit. COVID was in March. By June or July, things were opening up a little bit. People were finding a way to open up and do things. The NBA went to like Disney World, tested everybody, and had them play each other at basketball. You get this sense that, like, we needed to play. We needed to get back to what we were doing. So finally one day I was like, well, look, we can do what the NBA do. Let's all get tested. Let me find a place for us to go rehearse. So we went to there was a club that we used to play at every once in a while that was always friendly with us. And we went upstate, did the rehearsals, and then we went to Van Gelder Studios and we made the record. Cats Out of the Bag is one of the tunes we workshopped and developed in our little bubble and recorded. It's a Cecil McBee tune, which again, it's the second time we recorded a blues, what is essentially a blues by him. But like I call the other blues he did, it was a blues with a twist, because that's Cecil McBee. Again, rich history, rich, reverence to the things that came before us. But let's make it a little different. Well, let's do this. Let's twist this way. Let's twist it. So it always becomes something uniquely Cecil's. And by us working it out together, uniquely the Cookers. So, but it's a blues, and most people can recognize it as a blues to a certain extent. And it's just an interesting thing to see those guys play the blues, because again, the blues is in them. Billy Harper blows a note. You hear the blues. You hear the 50 years of this. I mean, they've lived it. Cecil McBee grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he talks about when he was a kid, trying to make his first pennies, going to town square or whatever, and shining people's shoes. When he was like 8 or 9 years old, it was the only way, for him to make pennies when he was a kid. This is Cecil's blues, but Cecil's way of putting it.
Here are the Cookers with Cats Out the Bag.
We're also the band of long explanations. You should see us at a clinic. One question, 7 guys answer. 2 hours later, like, okay, guys, we got, time to go.
David, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a pleasure.
Sure.
Thanks for listening. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in February 2025 and stay with the U.S. Modernist crew at our compound? Everyone needs a compound. AKA the Hotel Skylark? Email me at george@usmodernist.org. Okay, Tom, it's all yours.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,500 significant modernist houses, and access 4.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with Kelly Policelli on guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Waking Up the Crispy Bacon and Frittatas Eaten Outdoors by the Shimmering Pool, Palm Springs edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.